The Meritocratic Party. There is one way out of this mess we call Earth, and it is by means of a merit system. The only meritocracy is the one designed by God, to build the church. Therefore, only Christians and spiritually mature Christians at that, are able to form a meritocracy. Which means only a church built by spiritually mature Christians can get the world out of this mess. However, that being said, not everyone will ever be spiritually mature, and not all of this mess that is conventional solutions are not solutions at all. This world, the one we are all familiar with, is not the only world. The thing that confounds this world is that it is based off of a paradox. And paradoxes are irresolvable problems, for those who do not know. If a problem is not resolvable, it cannot be solved, and that is the problem with this world, or at least this system we all live in. There is no proper name for this system. In one sense it is composed of the spiritually immature. Others might call it Babylon, and others liberalism, or whatever else appears to reflect the most prevalent thread. However, there is no adequate term because no one but the spiritually mature even understand this world as the manifestation of a single system. This system does manifest a wide range of symptoms, but if the symptoms are many, the central issue is still one and common to all of these political and economic and even religious institutions. Who would think capitalism and communism have more in common than they do what separates them? That they do keeps us fighting over which is best, even while failing to notice neither is better than the other. Being different is no recommendation. Truth gives us a complicated picture of a war that is a proxy war, a false war, a way of diversion. This is the war between the left and the right. It is a false flag war, but it has been very successful keeping us fighting a false war. A war in this the only victor possible is Satan, and the only loser is God. So long as we keep fighting this war, we are not building his church. This war does not lead to the spiritual maturation of man. If we live in the phenomenological world, we are as parasites. We must take from the earth to live. This is only permitted to build the church. We are authorized to use nature and our own abilities, to build what God ordained. But God did not authorize random projects for miscellaneous. We have a job to do, and this requires a greater focus than what is possible in a world where everyone is permitted to do their own thing. But the paradox is that in the natural world there is only one organizational principle, and that is the law of nature. Nature is red in tooth and claw. This is not an elaboration, it dramatizes the fact that the only creative energy, in the natural world, comes as a kind of push force, called causality. In nature everything is a result of an earlier event. Every result is a winding down of an event that released the stored energy of the cosmos in what is called the Big Bang. This entire scenario is contradictory and contrary to all logic and reason. Even after we get the process started, which in itself is impossible as time cannot begin and space cannot find room in any place other than its own extensions, it all will wind down. But it only winds down because we have postulated it somehow started at a high level of energy, in fact what is pretty near infinite energy in an infinitely small space. After all, if we are going to start with a Big Bang, we may as well start with the biggest one possible. However, causality is a zero-sum game. The system starts off with X amount of energy, and slowly decays. Any energy used in one area is not available elsewhere. So those who would amass power must amass power that is no longer available elsewhere. But the question must be answered, where does this power come from? There is infinite energy locked up inside of matter, but the key phrase here is locked up inside. Natural creatures and limited in the amount of energy they can access, directly. Most of the energy obtained is obtained from eating other creatures and plants. Subsistence cultures tend to be subject to this kind of limitations. Subsistence cultures use only what can be gleaned without extreme effort. But such cultures are subject to the vagaries of weather and do not have much resilience against unforeseen events. To get away from the limitations of the natural order, one has to introduce civilization. This is essentially the adoption of specialization. Only when we each specialize in some ways can we climb out of the limits set by the natural order. But to specialize requires a large degree of trust. It is one thing to live in a subsistence culture in which one does only the minimum needed, and when times are hard what is available is shared equally. It is another to work as hard as one is able and be expected to share with those who hardly work at all. Specialization does not work if some are expected to share with others who do not work at all. To work, people must keep all or at least a substantial amount of what they earn. This might be common sense, but it does not help to know these things to be true. There is in this system nothing to be done about it. We can say the earth is unowned or owned by everyone, but this only gets us to the subsistence level. To go further, the worker has to be paid for what he does, the investor has to be able to keep a substantial part of his investment. So far, in this world, this has necessitated the creation of the state to administrate the exchange of goods and services. We can say the free market ought to be free, but there is never a shortage of people who want to exploit the market for their own ends. And so the state is created as a sort of umpire. But the state has to be paid, so it solves one problem and exacerbates another. Not only must the state administrate the exchanges in the market, it has to administrate the economy in such a way that it is supported. The state does not create any value and so exists on the back of the productive sector. If all of this is true, how can we have a meritocracy? The natural order creates inequality based on power disparities, and the only solution is to create a state, which ultimately makes matters worse. The state does mediate disputes between private parties and establishes order based on the monopolization of force, but the state is itself a parasite. Yet it might still be thought that the state could still be a force for good. It creates costs, but on the other hand, it reduces conflicts. But we underestimate the real cost. All 10 great evils are the result of the state. But all too often we look at the state as a neutral player. But it is very biased in how it treats different subjects. This goes back to the difference between the spiritually mature and the spiritually immature. The state does not exist in the church. The church that is governed by the state is an organization servicing the spiritually immature. The state needs people to be and remain spiritually immature, or it has no role to play. Spiritually mature persons do not need the state. This is why the Meritocratic Party is geared towards downsizing and eventually eliminating the state. This is our primary policy plank. We promote merit. But without the church, there is no merit. This is what people have missed. We acquire merit as we build the church. This means those who are not spiritually mature do not have merit, and those who lack merit are not part of the mature congregation of God. Therefore, the Meritocratic Party is as much evangelic as it is political. It is as much about spreading the word of God as it is about building up the economy. The solution is simple. We stop all freeloading. The inverse truth of a worker is worthy of his wages is that the freeloader has no right to steal what the worker earned. We begin to end all benefits, positions, policies and so on that transfer wealth from those who produce it to those who do not. The process is systematic. We find jobs as we eliminate freeloading. To find jobs, we stop the import of what can be made home. We force the improvement of technology and its standardization. Fewer parts and fewer cosmetic design changes. We will aim for the standardization of all parts. Products must be made to last longer. No product can be changed simply on the basis of design. What the Meritocratic Party does is to reduce and ultimately eliminate the pressure on wages. If something is forcing wages to go up, it must be eliminated. There ought to be zero deductions from a worker's wages. This is called the Zero Deductions Doctrine, ZDD. That is our simple guide. God did not decree anyone should have ownership of what he created. We can access the natural world to add value to it. Those who add value build the church, because that is what the church is, the work we do, minus the assets of God. The details are worked out and have been uploaded, but more will be forthcoming about forming this party and promoting a merit-based Christian